Thank you.
Thank you.
No, you're fine. Great. Where's the best place to stand? Here?
Yeah, anywhere right there is fine.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. We've gone through our technical glitches and got the projector working and ready for today's presentation, the faculty lectureship. We'll take a few minutes, just not really very long, give some introductions because we haven't had this for a couple of months. This will be the first faculty lectureship for this semester. The lectureships are basically voted on from applications in the fall from the committee, the faculty lectureship committee. That's Dr. Del Porto, Dr. Evanook, Dr. Starr, Dr. Varela, and Dr. Zhang. I want to thank them for their efforts up front to bring us this great opportunity and lecture. As always, in terms of comm services, John Howard's group and staff, we're able to virtually send this out so that people out there can link in and see it. For you, those of you here, you can basically partake of coffee, water. There'll be refreshments after our presentation. And of course, that means we get to introduce our presenter today. Josh Blackwood is going to present. He's an instructor in technical theater and design. But he's not talking about that today. Here's what he wrote. Did Marie Antoinette actually say, "Let them eat cake"? Not exactly, but her behavior at court and use of fashion as a political tool was a main contributor to losing her head during the French Revolution. So, what Josh is asking is, come join him as he explores how the Queen's fashion and extravagant behavior led to the downfall of the French crown. We'll have him talk to us for several minutes. After that, we'll have questions and answers, and there'll be refreshments after all of that. So again, I thank you all for coming today, and let's introduce and let's bring our new lecturer this semester, Josh Blackwood.
Thank you. Correction, it's Jenkins. It got changed, but that's okay. So good afternoon. Welcome. Right off the bat, no, Marie Antoinette never said, "Let them eat cake." The French phrase is "qu'il mange de la brioche." It was attributed to her by a group of courtiers who were anti-Marie Antoinette. So we'll talk about that a little bit. She wouldn't have actually ever said it anyway, because she is the daughter of Maria Theresa, the Empress of Austria. And Maria Theresa was an individual who was very good at matters of state, and matters of state included taking care of the people that she ruled. So Maria Theresa oftentimes would tell her people to go out and establish soup kitchens and deliver soup to old ladies and farm cottages. And that's the world that Marie Antoinette was brought up in. So she would not have been that harsh, although she was a bit disconnected from her people in France. And there's a reason for that. So, it's one of the many lies that were spread throughout Paris in order to discredit the person who many blamed for the problems of France. She was seen as one person influenced the behavior of the king as related to financial matters. For Marie, there were four major actions that were the cause of the hatred of her by the people of Paris. She was an outsider who spent lavishly, including on a private house, which was unheard of in the French court, and there was the affair of the diamond necklace. So I'm going to present her life, her fashion choices, and her role in court, as well as her extravagant spending to piece together not the main reason, but reason enough that she lost her head in the French Revolution. So, fair point, her lavish spending was not the main reason. There were numerous attempts by Louis XVI to rein in court spending. He had no less than 3 financial ministers that all asked for the same thing, which was to tax the rich. All 3 ministers got dismissed because none of them could get their bills passed the National Assembly, known as the Estates General. The rich simply had no desire to give money for the government for the betterment of the French people, especially when it meant less for them. Sound familiar? So, some basics. Louis' reign began in 1774. He was 19 years old. Marie Antoinette was 18. She was 1 year younger than him. He wanted to rule justly, but in an absolute manner. He liked to be nice. He was very cognizant of what happened to King Charles of England. When King Charles of England waged war against the British people, it cost him his head. We did not want that to happen to him. He vowed that he would never raise his standard against his own people. He was happy and relaxed in public, but it was a disaster in private. It took the couple 8 years to consummate their marriage. The first 4 years, Louis Auguste, as he was known, the Dauphin, didn't trust Marie, his wife. A lot of this was because the courtiers didn't trust her because she was an outsider. He had tutors who also spread bad rumors about her. It didn't help that she did not fit in very well at court when she first arrived. One factor was that she was very dismissive of King Louis XV's official mistress, Madame Bovary, and that caused a lot of tension. The rich nobles paid no tax, neither did the clergy. There were millions of French people who were overtaxed. The 3 estates were the nobility, the clergy, and the rest. The rest are the ones that pay the taxes. A loaf of bread was equivalent to 3/4 of a family's budget. The king tried, as I said, to instill tax reform 3 different times. All of them were failures. His brother was the biggest opponent of tax reform. And the king did try to modernize France, but again, the nobility, which had the most to lose, were the most against it. So, Versailles, this lovely place about 20 miles outside of Paris. It was the envy of the world at the time, and many European palaces were modeled after it, including Marie Antoinette's Hofburg Palace in Vienna. It was a world unto itself. The people that lived there preferred it that way. They hardly ever ventured beyond its grounds unless they were going to another grand estate. Some never left at all. They had little concern for the regular people. They lived in excess, spent in excess. Money was free-flowing for them, and they never cared where it came from, as long as it kept coming. Many nobles relied heavily on their fortunes, didn't care for the politics of France, and were expected to dazzle in court, dressed to impress and show off their wealth. Particularly of note, Versailles was a very nasty place. Marie Antoinette came from the Austrian court that took hygiene very seriously. At Versailles, people would regularly relieve themselves in the corners of the rooms. There weren't a lot of bathrooms around. Marie had a private bathroom, the king had a private bathroom, not many other people had any. Marie Antoinette was born on November 2nd, 1755, the 15th child of Holy Roman Emperor Francis I and Empress Maria Theresa. She was the second to last. They had 16, 10 of which survived into adulthood. She lived a secluded life, The royal palace at Hofburg was divided between the public political areas and the more private family areas. Marie never ventured from one to the other and relished the quiet, intimate time she was able to spend with her father when he was home. She was known around the court as Marie Antoinette, and because there were several Maries around, most of them her sisters, she was sometimes called Antoinette. Her mother, the Empress, used marriage to shore up political allies. All of her children's marriages were arranged, and Maria was no exception. She wasn't particularly destined for greatness, but she was the only option for the court of France. She would soon discover that the privacy of her life at the Austrian court would suddenly disappear at once in the French court. She wasn't particularly smart. She wasn't well educated. In fact, most people never paid any attention to her. The court didn't bother itself with her education and training and served no other purpose she served no other purpose other than being a pretty ornament to a royal court. All of it would change, however, when Marie's marriage to the Dauphin of France, Louis Auguste, was assured, especially since she was promised to him since she was 6 months old. Despite the lack of formal proper education, Marie was a quick learner, and this would prove beneficial as it was one of the few things that Louis Auguste admired in his new bride. Not much else. She did have horrible dental health, so that when she came to France, a dentist was actually brought in to correct her teeth before she met Louis Auguste. They were married by proxy in Vienna on the 19th of April, 1770, and she was then off to France, saying goodbye to family, friends, and her homeland for good. Once she left Austria, she could never return. As part of the arrangement, she was taken in an island between France and Austria on the Rhine, where she was divested of all of her clothes, jewels, and other possessions, including her dog, and dressed in the finest French fashions, even though her court attire that she arrived in was cut in the French fashion, which was popular in Europe at the time. This is where she also adopted the French version of her name and became Marie Antoinette. From the moment that Marie arrived in France to marry Louis Auguste, matters of clothing and appearance proved central to much of her existence and her downfall. A strict protocol governed much of what she wore, how and when she wore it, and even who put it on her. From her earliest days at Versailles, Marie revolted against court etiquette by turning her clothes and other accoutrements into a defiant, autonomous, and prestigious expression. She and the Dauphin were ceremoniously married at Versailles on May of 1770. She was 14 and he was 15. She was very well liked by her grandfather, Louis XV, but not many else. She ignored the king's official mistress, Madame de Berry, for the first few months that she was there, and did go over with many courtiers. She was nicknamed the Austrian, and few trusted her or her intentions, fearing her Austrian connections. At this time, although there wasn't war between France and Austria, there also wasn't happiness between the two countries either. Even the Dauphin didn't trust her, though this was most likely due to lies and rumors being spread around court, including by his own tutors. Although Louis Auguste seemed happy and relaxed in public and private, it was a different matter. It took 8 years for the pair to consummate their marriage, a fact not lost on the people of the day. Rumors swirled of infidelity or that Louis didn't like his wife. The real reason historians believe, sorry, we're going to get a little graphic for a moment, is that he had no idea, nor did she, on how to have sex. Remember, they were both married at 14 and 15. There were rumors that he would mount his wife, insert his penis, lay there for about 2 minutes, remove himself, the queen would leave his bed, and he would have a happy ending alone. Finally, in 1777, after a visit to Versailles from the queen's brother, who was now the Roman emperor, they were able to finally consummate. It is believed that the brother had a manly chat with Louis and explained a few things. Though not permitted by her station to be political, She did use fashion as a key weapon in her struggle for prestige, authority, and her very own survival. She was never able to rule France, not even as regent in the case of her son. So if Louis XVI would have died, she would not be able to be regent to their children. For Marie to modify conventions of royal appearance was virtually unheard of. Aided by a gifted class of designers, she cultivated looks that were playful and unpredictable. She was a trendsetter. She set out to please and wanted to be seen as the most fashionable and sought as the most fashionable and sought after woman in France. She knew that fashion was the key to winning over the courtiers, and she would stop at nothing and spare no expense to gain their support. So, to give you an idea of what they were wearing at the time, these are from the Metropolitan Museum in New York. They have a lovely collection of fine French garments, especially from that time period. Very little of Marie's actual wardrobe survives. Her wedding dress still survives. A few pairs of shoes still survive. Most of her wardrobe got taken away or destroyed. It was either taken away and given away as souvenirs, or when they broke into Tuileries Palace after she tried to escape, they just decimated everything that was royal. So we have a French waistcoat from the We have a French waistcoat from the mid 18th to 19th century, made of linen. Another French waistcoat made of silk from the early 18th century. The shirt is circa 1780, so right about the time of Louis and Marie Antoinette. It's made of linen. The trousers are made of silk from the 18th century. The gowns at the bottom are cotton, late 18th century, not necessarily what would have been worn at court. What would have been worn at court would be silks and brocades. This would have been a lower status noblewoman. But still, even lower nobility still had to dress to impress, because if there was a chance that you were going to meet the king, you had to look the part. Their contemporaries in Britain, the green suit there in the bottom, is from 1755, 1765. Completely different style cut. The British idea was to veer away from the ostentatious French. And then the last picture there is a court suit from 1810. This would have been during the time of Napoleon, before the Restoration. It's an example of skilled French embroidery in the silhouette of men's courtwear during the time of Napoleon Bonaparte. Bonaparte revived the importance of court traditions when he crowned himself emperor in 1804. This revival necessitated the recreation of acceptable court dress, which had been defunct since the elaborate and costly court of Louis XVI prior to the Revolution. The intricate embroidery pattern is intriguingly mimicked between the waistcoat and coat, reinforcing its status as a full suit. I've been talking a lot today. Here, up in the upper left, we have 18th century French silk gown. Silk and metallic gold stockings from the late 18th century, both French. All of the fans are French. They are ivory and silk. So it's ivory bone for the frame and then silk hand painted for the fabric. And then a gentleman of either the clergy, nobility class, lower nobility class would wear the last outfit. That's silk and linen from 1790. So the Queen was a fashion icon. She sought to introduce several changes at court. Among them were the discontinuation of heavy makeup. A lot of the women, especially if they had gotten smallpox, would wear heavy white lead makeup to help cover the scars. She did away with that. She also got use of the popular wide panniers, which are the ones that made the dress come all the way out to here. The new fashion called for a simple feminine look. And much of this, of course, came at the disapproval of the order courtiers. They didn't like change. They certainly didn't like to have to, while they didn't care about money, they also didn't want to have to buy new clothes. So chief among the Queen's designers was Rose Batten. Called the Minister of Fashion by her detractors, Batten designed many of the hats, wigs, and other accessories that Marie used daily in her life and for those special occasions. Batten and Marie were introduced in 1772, and following the coronation of the king, they met twice a week. Batten would visit Marie to show off her latest creations, and she was the principal milliner, dressmaker, and wig maker to the Queen. A relationship that, including the scandals, would last a lifetime. Batten was the brains behind the fashion of Marie Antoinette, and working with the royal hairdresser Leonard, they created some of the most daring new looks that became the height of French fashion, quite literally, with some wigs going as high as 3 feet. Imagine having that on top of your head, at least for a couple of hours. Batten witnessed much at court, though the Queen was able to effect some change in French society. Her creations established France as the center of fashion, and this elegance established the worldwide reputation of French couture. So Rose Batten was one of these founding individuals who created the couture movement. Under the generous patronage of the Queen, so generous that at times even the Queen had no idea how much she was spending, Batten's name and was included with the excess of Versailles. Their close relationship provided Batten with valuable foothold in the social and political significance of the fashion court. Their relationship lasted until Marie's death. Batten supplied the morning dress she wore and the minor things such as ribbons and simple alterations. After the Revolution, Batten snuck away to London where she set up a shop. It wasn't really safe for her for a little while because she was associated with the monarchy. Anybody in France associated with the monarchy at the time of the Revolution soon found out that their head would be separated from their body. Batten did come back to France in about 1795. We have two pairs of shoes from that time period. The first pair is, they believe European, they're not able to really trace it to a specific country. They're made of linen and metal from between 1675 and 1710. And then the second pair is most likely what they think to be British, made of leather from 1790 to 1805. Interestingly, men invented the high heel. It was men at the height of men's fashion, walking around the dirty streets. They wanted to be up so that their clothes wouldn't get dirty, and so they invented the high heel. The lower right picture is a painting of Marie Antoinette in one of her many extravagant outfits. She would often be seen with her wigs filled with feathers and birds and ribbons and other stuff. The public called her Madame Deficit. They were convinced that her spending was contributing as much to the country's economic issues as much as the other factors, such as the rich not paying any taxes. The Queen spent lavishly on clothes, jewels, hats, shoes, scarves, and a host of accessories. She was a symbol of the hated rich, and because of the past issues with consummating her marriage and producing an heir, she was the prime target of the people of Paris. She was lampooned in the tabloids for luxurious extravagance. She attended the opera, Paris balls, dances, and was a frequent visitor to the Paris casinos, where she lost exorbitant amounts of money. She had a reputation for extravagance, was ostentatious, and had decadent tastes. All of this developed in her early years at Versailles. It was speculated as an attempt to compensate for her unhappiness. Still, even after withdrawing from the social scene later in life and spending considerably less, the damage was done. The people needed someone to blame, and she became the target. The Queen's spending was just one part of the grand scheme that led to the revolution. The people were starving, while Versailles held lavish banquets. Prior to the March on Versailles, the king was entertaining Swedish, I think, Swiss or Swedish guards at Versailles with a lavish banquet. That news made its way back to Paris, and a whole bunch of women decided that they had had enough and started to march. They were then eventually joined by a whole bunch of other people. They're pretty angry because I don't know about you, but I'm not necessarily going to march with a pitchfork for 20 miles. There were multiple failed or poor harvests, high food prices. Previously, I mentioned a loaf of bread could cost a family 3/4 of their budget. There was also persistent high taxes. The rich, the clergy, and the nobility did not pay any taxes, and the king failed multiple times to get the three estates to agree on the tax scheme. There were alarming bouts of civil unrest, and many struggled to feed their families. So he called several meetings of the Estates General, which is all three bodies. And in France at the time, it wasn't representative government. You didn't have one person for X number of population. What you had was, you had a number of people that represented the nobility, a number of people that represented the clergy, and a number of people that represented the rest. They all had equal votes, which meant that anything to get passed, the nobility or the clergy would have to agree with the rest. So obviously, with trying to raise taxes on the rich, neither the clergy nor the nobility are going to agree to that. People blamed the Queen. They thought that the Queen was telling the king bad information. In truth, historians believe that Louis was actually a very weak ruler who couldn't make up his mind about stuff. He liked to go hunting. He liked to tinker with blocks. He liked to spend a lot of time out in the countryside away from Versailles. And he didn't really see much of Marie. She was allowed to come and go as she pleased to Versailles. We'll discuss in a moment her little hideaway on the grounds of Versailles. Even he had to get permission to visit her. The constant barrage of lies and scandals promoted by the pamphleteers in the 1770s and the 1780s, everyone chose her as the root cause, with some claiming that she was working with Austria to attack France. So diamonds are not a girl's best friend in the case of the Queen. One of the big problems for her image occurred between 1784 and 1785. The Queen's reputation already tarnished by gossip, this scandal ruined what fragile remains she had, by the implication that she participated in a crime to defraud the crown jewelers. It was known as the Diamond Affair, or the Affair of the Queen's Necklace. It began with some jewelers, Bulmer and Versailles, presented the Queen with an exquisite diamond necklace that had originally been made for Madame du Barry before Louis XV died. The necklace was made of 647 diamonds of incredible cut and clarity, and in today's money would be worth well over $15 million. The queen, not wanting to wear another woman's necklace or something designed for another woman, especially somebody like Madame de Berry, declined to buy it. Thieves hatched a plan. Using a prostitute who looked like the queen, they tricked an aristocratic cardinal, Cardinal de Rohan, who was France's almoner, and one of the people that people alleged she had an affair with, to buy the necklace to gain favor with the queen. When the matter was discovered, the cardinal and all but 2 conspirators were arrested, tried, and convicted, except the cardinal, who was found not guilty. The proclamation of the cardinal's innocence implied that the theft must have been the queen's fault for coveting the necklace because it appeared that she tried to defraud the crown jewelers. She was seen as a spendthrift who cared more about her vanity than she did for France and her people, and her reputation greatly suffered and never recovered. For many people in France, that was it. They were done. They did not want this person anymore in their lives. True numbers are not available as to how much Marie Antoinette really spent. Estimates in today's money range anywhere from $150,000 to $250,000 per day. It currently costs the country of France $54 million a year to run Versailles. That's about $150,000 a day. And that's not with the thousands of servants and staff that would have been at Versailles at the time of the Queen and the courtiers. Because you had the Queen, the King, their children, all the nobility that was at court, all the servants, all the staff, a lot of people. She enjoyed gambling, often for days on end. On one filmed occasion, she played for 3 days, ending on her 21st birthday. She completely redid the Petit Trianon. It was a small chateau on the grounds of Versailles, a place where only she could go and even the king needed permission to visit. She spent lavishly to create a rustic farm retreat, completed with a peasant family to tend livestock and produce food where she and her ladies and children would play act and play the peasant role as a means of entertainment. The Petit Trianon was originally built for the mistress prior to Madame de Berry, or Louis XV. And then Madame de Berry inherited when she became the king's official mistress. And then when Louis XV died and Louis XVI became king, he gifted the Petit Trianon to Marie, who spent lavishly completely redoing it. The idea that the queen was wasting money on a fantasy was considered by many to be a cruel ignorance and disregard of the problems of the people of France. France was still had debt from the 7 Years' War, and was at this point sending money to the new American colonies to help fight the British. America never repaid it. Marie was an extravagant spender, often spending on redecorations for Versailles and its gardens as it suited her fancy. She would walk through the garden one day that had just been freshly planted a few days before and say, "No, let's change all of this." People saw the queen as a parasite that embodied everything that was wrong in society and the evil of the French court. She funneled millions to architects, gardeners, caterers, entertainers, cobblers, perfumers, decorators, and dressmakers. Still, this did little to compensate for the wars and corruption, as well as the inequality that was responsible for France's bankruptcy. The queen ignored it all. She ignored the hatred. Tensions began to escalate in June 1789 as the National Assembly began to demand more rights and Louis XVI began to push back with efforts to suppress the Third Estate. That was the rest of them. The Third Estate, the common people, formed the National Assembly. They marched to Versailles, demanding to meet the king. He refused, and then declared anything that they did to be illegal. Did not go over very well. The king's ineffectiveness and the queen's unpopularity undermined the monarchy and the support among the masses. On July 11, 1789, Paris was besieged with riots, which culminated with the storming of the Bastille. Many royalists fled France in fear of their lives. Marie Antoinette stayed behind in order to help the king promote stability, even as his power was being taken away by the National Constituent Assembly. When they stormed the Bastille, Louis was awakened at 2 o'clock in the morning and had all of his council awakened as well to try to deal with the problem. By the end of August 1789, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizens was adopted, which officially created France's constitutional monarchy, something that King Louis XVI still ignored. Due to a bread shortage in Paris, things became much worse for the king. On October 5th, 1789, after hearing of a lavish banquet taking place, a mob from Paris stormed Versailles and forced the royal family to move to Paris under the watchful eye of the Garde Nationale. The king and queen were installed under supervision at Tuileries Palace. The French Constitution of 1791 greatly weakened the king's power. On August 13th, 1792, the royal family was imprisoned in the Tower of the Temple in the Marais under conditions that were more terrible than during their confinement in Tuileries. One of the things that happened was that they escaped from Tuileries in the middle of the night. They had almost gotten away with it. They were heading towards the Austrian border, and they stopped, and Louis XVI stepped out of his carriage and was instantly recognized by the postmaster. Not because he was fabulously dressed, but because his side profile is on the stamp. Because he was recognized, they were arrested and taken to the tower. And it was at that point that people stormed Tuileries Palace and started ransacking the Queen's wardrobe. At this point also too, everybody was gone from Versailles, so Versailles was an open target. About a week after that, royal attendants were taken for interrogation, including the Princess de Pombal, the Queen's most ardent supporter. She was beheaded in the September massacre. At this time, like I said, if you were a monarchist, a royalist, or nobility, or anybody seen to support them, you were a target by the people. On September 21st, 1792, the fall of the monarchy was officially declared and the National Convention became the legal authority in France. The royal family was restyled as the non-royal Capettes, and preparations for the trial of Louis XVI for treason began. King Louis XVI was executed on January 21st, 1793, and from that moment on, Marie was known as the Widow Capet. It was, again, the Capet name was given to the royal family after the capture since they were no longer considered reigning monarchs. Upon the death of the king, Marie donned a black mourning dress, which was against the rules since black was the color of royalists, and used mourning accessories. She would wear these clothes every day until her trip to the guillotine. The dress had to be altered several times due to excessive wear. It was the only thing that she wore while she was imprisoned. It was thought that after the death of the king, the widow Capet should be shipped off back to Austria, back to her family. But because of royalist threats and several plots to break the widow Capet free, she was tried for treason for conspiracy against the new French government. Her daughter fled to Austria, and her son, who many feared would be used to try to reestablish the Bourbon dynasty, was locked away, tortured both verbally and physically, eventually dying at the age of 10 from tuberculosis, in part because of the squalid conditions of his imprisonment. At one point, the prison guards would force him to stand wearing a red beret and sing the national anthem of France. Marie's fate was the central question of the National Convention. On August 1st, 1793, Marie was taken out of the tower and placed in the conciergerie as prisoner number 280. She was tried by a revolutionary tribunal on October 14th, 1793. She wasn't given any time to prepare a defense. One of the most outrageous charges against her was that she sexually abused her son, Louis Charles, who, through coaching by his prison guardians, accused his mother. Despite the pleas of innocence, the Committee on Public Safety declared Marie Antoinette guilty of treason on the morning of October 16, 1793, after 2 days of proceedings. On that same day, Her hair was cut off, and she was driven through Paris in an open cart wearing a simple white dress. She was executed at 12:15 p.m., just 2.5 weeks shy of her 38th birthday. Both her body and the body of King Louis XVI were exhumed on January 18, 1815, during the Bourbon Restoration, and given burial in the necropolis of the French kings at the Basilica of St. Denis. The Bourbon Restoration was the king's younger brother, whose son married the daughter of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, the one that escaped Austria. On her last day, as on her first, all eyes of France would be on Marie Antoinette. Her will to control her image had not left her, and she managed, through her clothing, to always be the fashion queen of style. Although she had been forbidden to dress as a widow, for her trip to the guillotine, she always had a magic trick up her sleeve. When Marie stepped out of prison for the last time, she was placed in the cart and taken to the guillotine. She wore a white chemise with a fresh white underskirt, plum black shoes, and a white dishabille dress that she somehow managed to keep a secret from even her prison guards. All of these items were snuck in. She was radiant in white, a picture of heaven, and despite all of the restrictions with this outfit, she made the boldest fashion statement ever. She was pristine in white, the color of holy heaven and of eternal life. She established parameters of fashion, a legend that would attach to her name in death. Little is left of her once stately wardrobe, only a few scraps here and there that were somehow scooped up by royalists, all others being destroyed by the uprising. In the end, her steadfast resolve to always be the most sought-after woman in France was her undoing. Lavish spending, disregard for the people, the desire to be the most fashionable and to set trends didn't save her. She lost her head with many other royalists. Her desire to be the queen of fashion made her, in the end, the most hated woman in France, and she paid not with money, but with her life. With that, I will take questions. Yes.
I'll stand up because I'm way in the back. So, has anybody done work? Well, in terms of all of her wardrobe and so on and so forth, and if you have more to say about the gown that you've got on this last slide, that would be great too. But was she doing anything like focusing on domestic textiles? Was she focusing on imported textiles, or was that not on her radar? That just depended on what she was being shown in the sample books.
Well, some of it was what she was being shown. So Rose Batten became very famous. One outfit from her as a designer would cost most people multiple years' wages. And so Rose was the one who really sort of convinced Marie to wear certain things, to adopt certain things, to adopt certain styles. Because she figured that if the people of France saw her wearing it, they would want it so they could emulate the queen, and that would make people want to go spend money at Rose's shop. So even though she was dedicated to the queen, she still had her business in France, and a lot of people shopped there. This particular picture is actually a survival wardrobe piece. That is her wedding dress. She didn't really concern herself with setting specific fashion trends. She was told what was popular and she believed it. And she thought, hey, this is popular, so I'm going to wear it. Everybody else is going to want to wear it. Yes?
Was she aware of the things that were being said about her, and did that cause her any consternation, or just she clueless about what was being said about her?
She was fully aware of what was being said about her. The pamphleteers that I mentioned would they're pretty graphic. You can Google them. There's some pretty graphic images. She's rumored to have affairs with the king's brother, with women, with men. There is only one known official affair that she had that the king knew about, and that was with one of her guards that took place at the Trianon. But she was fully aware of everything that was being said about her. And she had wrote to her mother at one point to say, well, I can't really fault them because they don't know what they're doing. They don't know who they are. They don't know who I am. While she didn't ignore them, she also didn't give them any, she was like, I don't care. They're these people. They're going to say whatever they're going to say. They're not very well educated. They're not very well read. So they're grasping at straws here. But both her and the king knew full well what was being said about them in France. Any other questions? Yeah.
Was she really aware of the extent of the misery in the country?
No. She never left Versailles until they went to Paris, unless it was on official royal functions or royal engagements, like when the king would go to the Estates General. She was always just usually at Versailles, and most of the time she was at her private villa, which was unheard of because in France, the queen doesn't get a private villa that the king can't go to. But and Louis very rarely ever ventured beyond Paris. There was a time that he went to Normandy, and the people loved him in Normandy, and he made the statement, he's like, I know I'm getting close to Versailles because the smiles and waves are getting less and less. He was aware that there was a lot happening in France, that the people were unhappy, because he was being told this by his ministers. Because every time he wanted to impose taxes, they would say, yeah, but these people and these people and these people are going to rise up, and you've already got these people angry at you, so it's just going to make it worse. She sort of just kind of lived in a world where, hey, I'm the queen, everybody loves me. She wasn't involved in the political side of things. She tried to give Louis advice, and he was like, listen, I give you free reign to come and go as you please. Let me think how I want to think. She was certainly aware of some of the stuff that was being said about him. But in terms of how bad the situation really was, she wasn't aware of that because she was never in the room when those conversations were happening.
Well, if there's no more questions, let's thank Josh one more time for the presentation. And please partake of the refreshments right off to the side and keep up the discussion. Thank you for attending.
Boy, everybody looks so proud.
Yeah. Well,